Hey everybody on YouTube, it's me, Rachel, the Student Witch, and welcome to, I believe this is the 4th installment of my Witching Through a PhD series. I'm so pleased with how this series is going, and I'm also very pleased with y'all's reaction to it. So thank you for your support, for the great feedback. So I am presenting at a conference tomorrow. Today is April 7th, Friday, April 7th, and tomorrow a local university here in the Boston area, they're graduate students who are in the same kind of department that I'm in, but at a different university. Their graduate students have put together a graduate student conference. And I figured, it's been about a year and a half or so since I've presented at a conference. I should, stick my neck out there and present some of the research that I'm doing that will probably turn into the first chapter of my dissertation. Even though dissertating ain't happening for another year because I have to get through the exam process and then get my prospectus passed and all of that. So I figured, since I'm presenting at a conference tomorrow, a grad student conference, why not talk about, how to mentally and spiritually prepare yourself for not only the presentation part of the conference, but also the writing process that goes into presenting orally. Wine break. So, I'm going to be talking about the 3 kind of steps. Well, actually, there's 4 steps to preparing yourself and also your research, your work for a conference. As graduate students, if you've never presented at a conference before, I would suggest starting at a graduate student conference. And actually, the conference I'm going to tomorrow is my first grad student conference. I just dove into the legit conferences early on. I don't suggest doing that. It was very nerve-wracking. I felt out of place. I was younger than everybody else there. It's intense. So I would suggest starting off at graduate student conferences, which are still important, and actually there's a camaraderie there because most people who are there, who are presenting at the different panels throughout the day, they are also graduate students. They're presenting their research, and they're there mostly to get feedback and suggestions for reading and research more than advertising their research, which is kind of like what the professors do. So start off with a graduate student conference. And also most grad students, what they do is they take one of their term papers, one of their final papers from one of their classes, the one that they like the most, the one that they feel most passionate about, the one that's most pertinent to what they want to research, and they turn that into a conference paper. So step 1 would be to find the right conference, right? So usually your department will send a bunch of CFP, call for paper emails. Pay attention to those emails. You can also just check out the universities in your area and just get a scope for what's out there, what your options are, what would be a good conference, a graduate student conference to go to, one that's pertinent to your research interests, the one whose theme is pertinent to your research interests, those kind of things. And also another thing to keep in mind is travel funding. Depending on your financial situation and also depending on how much funding your department has, you might have to apply for funding, in which case do prosperity spell work. I have actually done a spell for travel funding for a conference, and even though the funding I applied for from the graduate school, I didn't get, it still turned out well for me because I didn't have to pay for my hotel room. And that saved me $250 because it was in New York City and it's super expensive. So do spell work for funding. I'm going to do a separate video in this series with more details about that. But yeah, don't be afraid to use your witchy knowledge for very academic, mundane shit like grant writing and applying for funding, for travel funding for conferences and stuff like that. Like, do it. And actually, this brings me to step number 2. So let's say you have your term paper, you are ready to turn it into a conference paper, you found your graduate conference in your field at a university somewhere, you have the funding to go there, and then it's time to send in or apply for the conference. So this usually entails sending in an abstract. Sometimes the abstracts are as short as 150 words, sometimes they're up to 300 words. So you condense this term paper and all these ideas you have in your head into a 300 or 200 word abstract to send in to apply for this conference, right? Now, I am a big proponent of turning your desk, your workspace, into a sort of altar. But for me, my magical practice and my spiritual beliefs and my academic work overlap and intermingle with each other. That might not be the case for you. So I actually have you on my desk right now. Maybe I can move the camera without knocking stuff over. But this is my desk. It's pretty boring. I do have a big ass plant here though. His name is Alistair. Anyway, so turn your desk or your workspace, if you can, into a sort of altar. What I used to do when I was writing my term papers, to help like kind of calm me down and get me focused, I would have a candle on my desk and I would tell myself, okay, as long as the candle is lit, I'm going to sit down and work. Of course, I was the one blowing out the candle and lighting it, you know, I had control over that. You could try getting those tea lights, those little tea light candles, and I'm not really sure for how long they burn, like 2, maybe 3 hours, something like that. So just, you know, burn some incense, burn some Palo Santo, sage, whatever, sage your workspace, and get a little tea light candle and just say, for as long as this candle is burning, I will be productive. And that can be like your mantra. You know, turn that altar, or turn that desk into an altar. So that's part 2, is writing the abstract and submitting it. And again, when you're submitting it, when you are applying for the conference, use your witchy knowledge. Even if it's just something as simple as saying a blessing or some sort of prayer before you click the send button on the email when you're applying for the conference, just something to send out those good vibes and get the readers of your abstract in your favor, right? It can be something as simple as that. Step number 3 is related to step number 2. This is actually, let's say you sent off your abstract, you did your witchy work, you sent it out with good vibes, you got your candles going on your desk, and then you get the email back a few weeks later saying that you've been accepted. Hooray! Well, this means that you have to actually turn that term paper, that longer paper, into a shorter conference paper. And in my field, the typical conference presentation is 20 minutes, and we sit and we read. It's different for different fields. It sounds very boring, but, well, it is very boring. But for a 20-minute paper, it's about 8 to 8.5 pages, double-spaced, 12 font, Times New Roman, which is what I have here for mine. So sometimes your term papers are going to be 20, 25 pages, and then all of a sudden you have to cut it in half, or actually cut it down even more. So while you're working through that process, again, the desk is your altar. And I actually have a few video ideas for this series that I'm going to probably do over the summer. about how to use the tarot for the academic writing process, specifically the court cards. I think those are really good archetypes for the different stages of academic writing, whether it's a term paper, a conference paper, or submitting an article to a journal to be published, which is something I'm hoping to do or start getting the ball rolling this summer. So while I'm going through that process, I will make that more detailed video about using the tarot for academic writing. But for now, again, just make your desk into an altar, and use that tea light as your timer. I'm really bad at procrastination. It's related to my anxiety. So for me to have a specific window where I need to dedicate myself to just sitting down and doing the work instead of procrastinating, that's very important to me. So that's why I would use the candle as my symbol for okay, I'm entering into a workspace and a working mind for as long as this candle is lit. And then once I blow the candle out, I leave it at the desk, right? It's kind of the idea of an altar, like you see mine behind me, is to carve out within the mundane a sacred space, right? Well, it's the same thing with the work desk. You carve out from the mundane a space. It might not be a sacred space, but it's definitely a safe space. It's a space for intellectual growth and pursuits. So it's very important to have that safe intellectual kind of space carved out from the rest of the mundane, right? So part 4, finally, it's time to present. This is where I like to work with chakras. I like to work with chakras because they provide very specific areas of my body to focus on, but also areas of my life and my spiritual life to focus on. So when you're at a conference, what's the most important chakra? Well, all of them, but especially this one right here, your voice, your ability to project your voice, to read clearly, to enunciate, to emphasize the right words so that your readers can follow you. Because it's not just a matter of, I'm going to read this paper now in a monotone voice. That's terrible. You need to inflect certain words, pause when there's commas, so that your readers can follow what you're saying, because they don't have the paper in front of them. So it's incredibly important to clear out that throat chakra, and you can use any sort of different crystals or incense or anything that that works for you to help you clear that out so that you can speak clearly. I do this too. Sometimes I do a throat chakra just meditation while I'm on the bus before I go in and teach, because I'm teaching a foreign language. I'm leading a classroom and classroom discussion, so it's very important for me to have very strong and clear throat chakra, or just the ability to speak. So that's something I would suggest. As far as the nervousness goes, I remember for one of my first conferences, I think my second conference, I was nervous, and my advisor, she halfway jokingly suggested that we take a shot of tequila before going in to present. Don't do that. I mean, I didn't, because I'm such a lightweight. I would obviously be under the influence of something if I took a shot of tequila and went in and presented. But if you do feel extremely nervous, because it is nervous, you put yourself in kind of a vulnerable position, because you're presenting your ideas to a room full of strangers. Now, sometimes the room full of strangers is only 3 or 4 people, in addition to the people on your panel. Or sometimes it's 20 or 30, right? So it can be a very vulnerable situation where you feel like you're on the spot, but it's important to learn how to own that. Own being in the spotlight. Own your ideas. Own them. And you're always going to get criticism. You're always going to get that suggestion, well, have you taken into consideration, blah, 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 blah. And, half the time, especially if it's a fellow academic or a professor making a comment during the Q&A part, about your work, like probably not half the time, but like 8 times out of 10, they're really just talking about their own research, and they hide it in the form of like a comment or a suggestion for you. So just prepare yourself for that, and just kind of prepare a response ahead of time, like, no, actually that's really interesting, I have not considered that, I'm gonna have to look into that, and then pretend to write it down. Even though you might know it has actually nothing to do with what you want to research. But just be prepared for that. I've seen that happen so many times at different conferences. So work on that throat chakra and do whatever you need to do to calm those nerves down. I like to carry a crystal with me. I've been carrying a bloodstone with me recently, and I find that it is very grounding. So I would suggest wearing or carrying in your pocket or something a very grounding and protective stone. If you are worried about receiving negative criticism, then tourmaline, black tourmaline would be great. Like, put up a shield and make you feel like stronger and more confident. Hematite, onyx would be another great one. Black onyx. But obsidian was actually what I was thinking. Black onyx is great too for like grounding and earthing and stuff, but obsidian would be great for like, when I think of obsidian, I think of it as almost like holding a spear and protecting yourself, kind of grounding. So yeah, carry a crystal with you. If you work with the tarot and there's a specific archetype within the tarot that calls to you, carry that tarot card with you. Put it in your pocket, put it in your bag or whatever. Wear specific jewelry. Anoint yourself with an oil, like some sort of protection oil or a Van or a selenite oil, to help kind of clear your head so you don't get lost in your nervousness. And you will get nervous, but it takes practice. It really does. Every conference I go to, I'm a little bit more confident. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to anoint myself or that I'm not going to carry my bloodstone with me tomorrow, because I'm definitely going to do that too. Those are the different steps towards preparing yourself for going to a conference, especially if it's your first one. I hope this is helpful or interesting. I know academic conferences, they're very important if you do plan on staying in academia and becoming a professor and getting your PhD and whatnot. Because in addition to your coursework and your research and your dissertation, you are expected to go out to these conferences, to network, to socialize, get your name out there. It's almost, you're kind of like selling yourself and preparing yourself to enter the job market. So it is really important to start practicing this skill very early on. I know a lot of grad students wait until they're done with, or PhD students wait until they're done with coursework to go to their very first conference. I actually don't suggest that. I think if not your first year can be kind of rough, but your second year you should start applying to present at conferences if you can. It's a really great experience. It's really great practice. And with your witchy powers, you can do it. You can conquer the nervousness and own your ideas and like get yourself out there. It's really a very interesting and great experience in the end. So I'm looking forward to making more videos for this series. Probably in the coming weeks I'll make another one about being in the witchy pagan closet while also being in academia, because that's a very particular closet to be in. So until then, and until next time, many blessings. Bye.